smoked no shit like that before.
Take these.
What?
Take these. This will
What
know
is
you
that?
up.
What is that, man?
Just take it. Hey, don't take those, man.
What?
I almost gave you the wrong shit, man.
Hey, man, I already took them, man.
Whoa.
Hey, what do you mean? Whoa.
Wow, man.
Hey, what was that shit, man?
You just ate the most acid I've ever seen anybody eat in my life.
Hey, man, I never had no acid before, man.
Please, I hope you're not busy for about a month.
By a combination of Carolina bluesmen Pink Anderson and Floyd Council. Original members consisted of Syd Barrett, Roger Waters, Richard Wright, and Nick Mason. In 1967, after signing with EMI, they released their first album, Piper at the Gates of Dawn. During this time, the band's creative force had been driven by Barrett's striking lyrics and unique sound effects. Their first British-produced hit was Arnold Lane, a controversial song describing the life of a transvestite.
Never smoked no shit like that before.
Roger Waters' life without a father, along with the loneliness, paranoia, and alienation he faced, led to what can easily be considered Pink Floyd's most successful piece of work, Dark Side of the Moon. 4 days after the release in 1973, it became #1 on Billboard album charts. After it stayed on top 200 charts for 736 consecutive weeks, or 15 years longer than any album in history, until it was removed in 1988, but not only after an estimated 40 million copies sold worldwide. Before the end of the decade, the band released 2 more albums, Animals in 1977 and The Wall in 1979. Animals had been influenced by George Orwell's Animal Farm, which portrayed humans as animals. It was a view Waters held toward humanity. The Wall was an even deeper view into the psyche of Waters and his pessimistic views, such as how he felt about formal education, confining the freedom of thought, and being able to find any comfort in most of his own personal relationships. With Dark Side of the Moon and The Wall being the highest-selling albums of each released year, Pink Floyd became the first band since the Beatles to have 2 top-selling albums in less than a decade.
3 years after the album was released in 1982, Roger Waters and director Alan Parker collaborated to make a feature film for The Wall. The movie is essentially a music video for the entire album, with the lead role played by Bob Geldof, the founder, Boomtown Rats, with animations featured by British cartoonist Gerald Scarfe. The film ended up grossing about $22 million at the North American box office. 1 year later, the group released the album, The Final Cut, which had been dedicated to Waters' father, and was also the last album with Waters himself. In this album, Waters had tried to explore and understand society's warlike tendencies. Due to some prior disagreements between bandmates, Waters decided to leave Pink Floyd in 1983, then proceeded to debut a solo album entitled The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking. 2 years later, legal tensions started to arise between Waters and his previous bandmates. Waters felt he was the main drive behind Pink Floyd, and that they had no right to continue on with the name or work that he created during his time in the group. However, through court proceedings, Mason and Gilmour successfully held rights to the content and the name. In 1987, Mason, Gilmour, and returning Richard Wright released the first album without Waters, A Momentary Lapse of Reason. Unfortunately, it wasn't well received by many critics, saying it could have been a Gilmour solo album. 2 days later, the band started their scheduled 11-week tour, ending up to be a 22-month-long tour and carrying a stage 85 feet tall and 98 feet wide. The tour became the second highest-grossing act of 1987 and the highest-grossing act in 1988 in the United States, bringing in $135 million overall. December of 1987, Gilmour and Waters signed a legal agreement stating that Waters was entitled to merchandise profits from his time in the band. After finishing the tour in 1989, each member went their separate ways doing solo work. Then in 1992, Mason, Gilmour, and Wright reunited to begin recording a final album that was released in 1994 titled The Division Bell. The tour then went on to 68 cities, playing to over 5 million people. At that date, the tour became the highest-grossing act in history, grossing $100 million in the United States, having only played 59 concerts, and grossed $250 million worldwide. However, the record was beat by the Rolling Stones tour, Voodoo Lounge, only 1 year later. In 1995, Pink Floyd released a live album, Pulse, which were live recordings of the Earl's Court performance, which was the last show ending the Division Bell tour. In 1996, Pink Floyd was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, where they performed the song Wish You Were Here with Billy Corgan of the Smashing Pumpkins. The band continued to release live albums for several years. In 2002, Q magazine rated Pink Floyd as one of the top 50 bands to see before you die. 2 years later, the same magazine placed them as the biggest band of all time, based on sales, concert attendance, and chart performance. In 2005, the quartet Waters, Wright, Mason, and Gilmour all reunited for the first time in 24 years, also playing together for the last time at the London Live 8 concert. David Gilmour also declared that their band would donate whatever sales made to charity, and also urged other musicians to do the same. Their set included the hits Money, Wish You Were Here, Breathe, Comfortably Numb, and Speak to Me. After the Live 8 concert, Pink Floyd interest increased along with album sales, jumping up to 3,600% for The Wall, 1,400% for Dark Side of the Moon, and 2,000% for Wish You Were Here, according to Amazon.com. Then in November, Pink Floyd was officially inducted into the United Kingdom Music Hall of Fame. Since then, the group has only re-released albums along with solo albums, with no prospect for any other type of reunion.